Final Cut Pro version 10.3. This is lesson 5. We are going to be revising the edit that we did in lesson 4. I've worked on it just a little bit more, and I've got you started with a new library and a few other bits of media that go along with it. Download all of that off of Schoology, and you can follow along as well. Let's go ahead and open that library and get started. Starting with the same shortcut that we used last time, I'm going to go up to Window, Workspaces, and choose Default. As we take a quick look at this timeline compared to maybe where we left off last time, you'll see some modifications have taken place. I'm going to hit Shift-Z to see the full timeline in the viewable area. You'll see I've added some additional B-roll to cover some of these jump cuts through here. I added a gap clip to stretch out the phrasing a little bit here, give it a little bit of breathing room. And you'll also notice these clips are color coded. I actually went back and I made some modifications to the roles of these clips. And that goes back to lesson 3 actually. But if you select a clip and you get over into the inspector, click on the info button, you can actually define different roles. So I've taken to adding these as B-roll, and that way they've got a little bit different color to them, and I could set that color up on my own. So I like the look of that. We're going to jump right in with a new edit on this project. If you've done a rough cut and you're ready to move on to another edit, or maybe you've got some comments from a client or a team member, the first thing you might want to do is duplicate that project. So in case you make some crazy drastic changes, you don't kind of ruin everything that you've already done. Let's go to the project in the browser. Let's scroll up, and then if we either right click or control click on this, we see two different options for duplicating the project. We're going to go in reverse order here. We're going to start by describing what it means to duplicate a project as a snapshot. This is probably the preferred method. It's quick, it's easy. What this does is it literally captures a picture of where your particular project is at this moment, and you can always jump back to it. So that's the one we're actually going to pick in just a second. But if we were to choose duplicate project, the top option there, that's a little bit more robust. However, when it's duplicated this way, you can actually make some changes to, say for example, compound clips in other instances that will come back and it will affect that particular duplicate. So I prefer to duplicate the project as a snapshot. Once we capture that snapshot, we can continue to edit in the original project, and we know we can always jump back to this snapshot, which if we change this view to list view, we can see that the snapshot is dated and timed. We're going to be adding some music to this project, and we're going to edit a little bit differently than maybe we've edited before. The first thing we're going to learn is how to lift particular clips from the primary storyline. So we want to select everything that's in the primary storyline, and there's a few different ways we could do that. We could always take the mouse down here to the storyline, click and drag across, but that could be a little bit cumbersome depending on the length of your project. So it might be even easier to click the last clip and then shift click the first clip. Once we've selected everything in the primary storyline, we can right click or control click, and we can choose Lift from Storyline. You'll notice Final Cut Pro took everything on the secondary storyline, slid that up into a new lane above this information that we just lifted from the primary storyline into its own storyline just above it. This might be a good time to do some resizing on the view in the timeline. Now we're going to jump back to that primary storyline in just a second, but the first little tidbit of advice that we got from our client was that they wanted to change one of these elements of B-roll above this story of Daniel giving the interview. We're going to talk about the 3 different types of replace edits that you can do to take one clip and switch it out for a different clip. First, let's position the playhead over this last little bit of B-roll here and have a listen.
With the knowledge that they provide here. When I went into college, I felt like I was ahead of the curve already going in there because...
And in this case, our client gave us a little bit of advice. They said, hey, We'd rather not see this clip because I actually happen to notice there's a guy on his phone right here. That's actually not at all a true statement. I just happen to pretend to use that as an excuse. So what we want to do is replace that clip with a new clip of B-roll. I'm going to go back to the very beginning of this B-roll clip, and with my mouse skimming across the top of that clip, I'm going to hit the letter I to mark an in point. I'm not even going to mark an out point because I want to look at the 3 different ways you can do a replace edit. So in order to do a replace edit, we're going to click and hold and drag that down and hover over the clip that we wish to replace. Once we let go, we're presented with our options for replacing. If we choose the first option, replace, then our clip in the browser takes its full duration and is substituted with the current clip that we're replacing. Let's see what that looks like. Well, that's not what we wanted at all, so I'm going to go ahead and undo that. Get back to where I was, click and drag, hold for just a second, and release. Now, if we choose replace from start, Final Cut Pro is going to line up the endpoint that I already marked in the browser, and it's going to fill the remaining time of the clip that's in the timeline. If we choose replace from end, Final Cut Pro is going to look at the out point that I marked in the browser and line that up with the out point in the timeline. Let's see what happens if I choose replace from end. Okay, that's not at all the clip that I wanted. I wanted this clip here at the beginning. So I'm going to do that one more time. Command Z to undo. Click, hover, hold, release. Choose replace from start. I can adjust the volume there as well. Next, we're going to import a new piece of music and overwrite that into the primary storyline. Click back on the browser, hit Command I, or right-click, choose Import Media, or from the File menu, choose File, Import Media. Totally up to you. But those of us who are really increasing our skills in terms of understanding this certification level, we know that there's 2 or 3 or 4 different ways to do something. There's even one more way that I didn't mention. I could have hit this button right here because I never do that. So I'm going to grab the music file that's included in the Google zip file, and I'm going to click import. Click in the browser and hit Shift Z to make each one of those clips a single thumbnail. I'm going to select the music file, and since my playhead is already at the beginning of the timeline, I'm going to hit the letter D to perform an overwrite edit into the primary storyline. Now I'm going to scroll back to the beginning and we're going to get to work refining this edit. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a marker in this music track right after that first sort of introduction before it starts to change chords. I'm going to click to select the music track, and I'm going to park the playhead back at the beginning again. Then I'm going to get ready to hit the M key on my keyboard.
It was definitely a great situation for me to be at SCA, and I would highly recommend anyone else be a part of it as well.
So that's right there where that new chord comes in, and actually the music's real cool. It kind of jumps to that chord a little bit early. I want to create a gap clip inside Daniel's interview storyline that's connected to the primary storyline. I want to create a gap clip in there so that I can later add some text and a bit of an introduction on top of that. So with that secondary storyline selected, I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Option W. Now I want to add a marker to Daniel's interview on the word great. First thing I'm going to do is hit the letter V on my keyboard, and that momentarily disables the playback on the music file, so now I can really listen in to the interview. I'm going to select the secondary storyline. With my skimmer placed just a little bit before the interview, I'm going to hit the space bar to listen.
It was definitely a great situation.
I hit M to make a marker on the fly as he says the word great, and I want that word great to line up with this marker here. So I'm going to extend the end of that gap clip by clicking and dragging. and that marker will lock in with the other marker. But wait a second, we actually just slid that underneath those additional B-roll clips above there. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that for just a second. I'm going to click to do that just one more time to do this ripple edit. This time I'm going to look real carefully at the information that's presented in those little help tags that are shown up there above my mouse pointer. +1:11. What that's telling me is I'm taking that edit point and I'm dragging it down the timeline 1 second and 11 frames. So I actually want to take both of those B-roll storyline elements that are connected above Daniel's interview, and I want to move them down 1 second and 11 frames as well. So I'm going to click the gray bar around that storyline. I'm going to command click the gray bar around this storyline. Then I'm going to click the plus button on my keyboard. And as soon as I do that, what happens is this information in the middle of the toolbar changes as if to kind of await some instruction. So if I type 111, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move those clips that distance down the timeline. Now I hit enter. Those clips have now adjusted themselves down the timeline the exact same duration as the ripple edit that I did on the gap clip at the beginning of this project. Select the music and click V again to enable it. Before we get too far away from the markers, I want to double click on this marker, which actually was connected to the secondary storyline, and that's why we see that marker there, in addition to the one that was connected to the video clip. That's actually kind of odd. I didn't know that was going to happen, but we're going to go with that. There's 3.5 types of markers. I say 3.5, there's really 4. Number 1 is a standard marker. That's what we just used. This is default. This is the simplest marker. Number 2, this is a to-do list marker. This creates a checklist, something that you can come back to later. This is also where you'll find that, quote, half type of marker, because as soon as I click completed on a to-do list item, it turns into that 4th kind of marker. So you've got a standard marker, you've got a to-do marker, and then a completed to-do marker. And finally, you've got a chapter marker. Adding a chapter marker here with a thumbnail that you might make could be used in different share formats, even in QuickTime movies, but definitely in DVDs and that type of thing. So let's go ahead and make that one a to-do list marker. And I'm going to go ahead and give myself some instruction here. Cover with drone footage. Now I've got a to-do list item that I can come back to and find later. Click Done. Now open the timeline index at the left of the toolbar across the middle of the screen, or hit Shift-Command-2. I never really remember that shortcut. And the timeline index is divided into 3 different parts. The first is for clips, the second is for tags, and the third is for rolls. The clips index will show you a chronological list that's start to finish of every single clip, every title, every generator, every transition, everything you have in the project. It'll also move to the selected clips location whenever you click on it. This area of the index is searchable, and it's a really convenient way to select and delete fade transitions, that kind of thing. The tags index shows you a list of all the markers you have, all the keywords, all the analysis keywords that Final Cut Pro automatically adds, to-do lists, completed markers, chapter markers, and so on. You can filter these using these sub-controls at the bottom of the interface. Let's go ahead and close the timeline index. Next, we're going to look at a non-magnetic editing tool called the Position tool. Now earlier we performed an overwrite edit with the music to the timeline, and essentially that's non-magnetic because we just basically destroyed anything that was in our primary storyline at that time. But one of the great things about Final Cut is, of course, it gives you all the different editing tools that you might want depending on the story that you're trying to tell. So choosing the Position tool from the drop-down Tools menu will let you pick up and move a clip, and it'll automatically create a gap on either side of it, or it'll let you smash it right over the top of other clips. So you do have to be careful with the Position tool. Now we're going to import some of that new footage that I gave you, but before we do that, let's hit Command H to hide Final Cut Pro, and let's take a look at these files on the desktop. I'm going to hit Command N to make myself a new Finder window, click on Desktop, and then right click across the top of this bar. Make sure Tags is selected. You'll have to select it. And what I've done with these clips before uploading them was I gave them some Finder tags. You can create Finder tags by right-clicking on a clip or really any type of file, going down to tags, and you can start to type in tags that you want to assign. Final Cut Pro, of course, is very powerful in terms of the metadata, all the information that it stores about files. So when we import this media into Final Cut Pro, we're going to go ahead and use those tags to create keywords. Command Tab will take you back to Final Cut Pro. Command I will bring up the import window. Select those 4 new clips that I've included and make sure Create Keywords from Finder Tags is selected. Now click Import. You'll see new keyword collections included with those new files that came in. Select the new B-roll keyword and select all 3 of those clips by clicking the first one and shift-clicking the last one, or hit Command A. What we're going to do now is create what's called an audition. Imagine if someone gave this awesome performance, but you liked one version and someone else on the team liked another version. You could put both of those into what's called an audition, and then you could switch back and forth seamlessly between those two. Now that we've selected those 3 files, right-click or control-click and choose Create Audition. You'll see a new clip container created in the browser in Final Cut Pro. We know it's an audition because there's a little spotlight in the corner of the clip. Click on the spotlight badge to open the audition. Now you can use the left and right arrows to select one that you like best. I'm going to go ahead and click Done. Then I'm going to hit Control D, and just like when we moved these other storylines earlier, the middle of our toolbar is highlighted to show us that it's awaiting our input. So I hit Control D. What that does is it lets us control the duration. I'm going to want a clip that's about 3 seconds long. So I'm going to hit 3, and instead of typing the frames that are included in 3 seconds, I'm going to hit the period, and that automatically fills out the 3 to be 3 seconds long. Then I hit Enter, and you'll see my selected region of the audition just moved down to 3 seconds long. I'm going to scroll down to the end of my interview, and I'm going to put it, let's say, right about here. I hit Q to connect edit, and I can open this audition by clicking on it. And one of the quirks with the audition is each of these clips inside this audition does maintain its own timing. So if I had this clip in the primary storyline, I would need to be careful about adding a new one of these audition options that might severely adjust the timing. So one good way to do this is maybe lift something from the primary storyline, or in our case, we know it's about 3 seconds long. So if I wanted to switch to this option, I could click Done, and with this selected, I could hit Control D, 3 period, and now that clip again becomes 3 seconds long. I don't want any sound on this clip, so I'm going to go Modify, Adjust Volume, and Silence. 0 is the shortcut to this. That's not a terrible shortcut to remember if you're looking to remember one keyboard shortcut today. Incidentally, you can get into a bunch of audition options by right-clicking or control-clicking, and you'll see those show up in here. If you really get into auditions, you might like to know some of these shortcuts. Now I want to play back and see how that looks along with Daniel's interview clip.
Ready going in there because of the stuff I had already learned here, especially with the new setup interview. It's crazy what they have now, and I would definitely take.
I actually want to scoot that down just a little bit in the timeline. And I want to do one more thing. This is probably one of the most important things you could ever learn about Final Cut Pro. I don't want to oversell it too much, but this is very important. First, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit, and then scroll over to center this up in the middle of the timeline. Of course, the magnetic storyline is based on connection points. And the connection point on this clip is right down here at the bottom. If I decided that I wanted to reposition that connection point, I would hit Command and Option and click on the clip. And you see that connection point moves over. That's one of the best shortcuts you can know for Final Cut Pro. Next, after repositioning that just a little bit more, I want to learn a couple of other shortcuts that I think are very convenient. All 3 of these particular editing functions are located up here under the Trim menu, Trim Start, Trim End, and Trim to Playhead. I'm going to remember these shortcuts though. Option, bracket, left bracket, and right bracket. So if I decide I want to trim off just this little bit at the beginning of the clip, I hold Option and left bracket, and that trims that selection to the left of my playhead. If I decide I want to trim the end of this clip, I can use the skimmer and hold Option right bracket. And that trims the outside right edge. This is a great editing technique that you can use in the primary storyline in particular, and you should try it. I know I've showed you before, but definitely check it out. I'm going to undo both of those, tap R to get the range tool, drag a selection, then from the trim menu, my option becomes trim selection. Option plus the backslash will trim the outside points of your selection. I don't use that one quite as much, but definitely try to work it in a few times and see if that's something that might be useful for you. Next, we're going to look at two of the skimming options that a lot of us may have already been using at different times. Click the View drop-down menu, and you'll see our options are either skimming or clip skimming. You could also add audio skimming to the mix. With clip skimming turned on, you can solo the audio and video of a clip, and the skimmer is contained to the clip you are skimming, kind of giving you a solo option as you're skimming across that clip. And it doesn't matter if the clip is on the primary storyline or anywhere else. If you have clip skimming enabled, you can use your mouse skimmer to go across the clip like this. I've disabled audio skimming, but if I wanted to turn that on, finally, I could also turn that off in the toolbar by clicking the audio skimming button. Last, I want to look at the solo option, which is the little headphones on the toolbar. And if you click on solo, that takes your selected clip, and that's the only clip that we're going to hear now as we play back across here.
Already learned here.
So we still have a lot of different things to do to this project, but we learned about auditions. That's super convenient. We learned about finder tags. We've increased our speed by using some of these trim options up here. I can't tell you enough how helpful these two are right here, especially for me. We lifted some of that content from the primary storyline into the secondary storyline. And we learned about markers and the timeline index. That's just a few of the things that we've been digging into on this. So, like I said, a lot of information coming your way, but this has been Chapter 5. We've been refining the edit. Next time we're going to jump back in Chapter 6, and we're going to take it to the next level.